eating dinner, and his wife walks in, and the husband's enjoying dinner, and he looks up for a second from his dinner and says, "Honey, how's your day?" And she replies with a flat monotone, "It was great." And he says, "Oh, I'm amazing. I'm so happy to hear it was great." And he just puts his head down and goes right back to eating dinner. That is a paradigmatic example of miscommunication, speech that is not effective. And speech is so essential, so fundamental to just about every aspect of living in this world. We are speaking beings. One of the interpretations of what makes humanity so distinct and so unique from animals is that we can speak. And the question is, what is speech? So I want to perhaps take a deeper journey into the essence of speech. And there's so much to talk about when it comes to Shmir Shalashon, when it comes to the essence of Dibur, essence of speech. There's so many halachic topics, but I want to approach this from perhaps a deeper perspective. And to do so, I want to entertain the spiritual concept of speech. What is the essence of speech? And we know that the Torah begins by saying that Hashem created the world with speech. It's a very strange way to think about creation, that Hashem created the world with speech. So what I want to do is I want to delve deeper into the essence of speech, and I want to understand what it means. For example, we're reading right now the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and one of the most fascinating and perplexing and famous aspects of the leader of Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu, is that he seems to have something wrong with his speech. And there's a machlokas rishonim. We are accustomed to assuming that he has speech impediment. So without getting into the different approaches right now, we can just ask a very simple question. What does that mean? Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of Klal Yisrael, the perhaps the greatest person who's ever lived. The Rambam refers to the paradigm of greatness, the paradigm of being a tzaddik, as everyone can be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu had a speech impediment. I mean, his job was to give over the Torah, the essence of giving over the most important dibur, the most important speech in the history of humankind, and he had a speech impediment. So what's going on here? And I guess one last question, just to frame the full spectrum of speech, is when we think of problematic speech, most people think of sheker, of lying, but I would say a fair amount of people, if not maybe a majority of people, will immediately think about lashon hara. Lashon hara, Shmir Shalashon, stop, don't speak lashon hara. But if you really think about lashon hara, most people think that lashon hara is speaking things that are negative about other people when they're not true. But that's not true. That's sheker. Sheker, minvar sheker tirchak, is don't lie. But don't speak lashon hara is the exact opposite. It's when you say something that's absolutely true, but it's hurtful. It's negative, causes damage, causes people to be embarrassed, causes reputation assassination. So what's so bad about lashon hara? Many people who know the halacha know that lashon hara is only when it's true. They say, like, what's so bad? I'm just saying the truth. I didn't make it up. I'm not like, creating gossip and stories that aren't actually rooted in truth. So what's the real problem of lashon hara? So I think the best way to frame our discussion is to delve into the essence of speech. And it's one of the first times I can say this. We're going to go deep, but there's only so much we can do in one chair. I developed all of these ideas in much greater depth in my brand new sefer, The Journey to Your Ultimate Self, just came out. And it's one of the first time I'm able to say that in an actual share. Never dreamed I'd be able to say that. But we're going to go as deep as we can go with the time that we have. And I think the best way to frame this is to understand the essence of what speech does. Because if you think about it on an existential level, we all wake up at a certain point in our lives. Let's assume, for argument's sake, it's, you're a teenager or a young adult. And you realize that you're in this world and you're alone. Right? No one hears your thoughts. No one knows how you feel. No one knows who you are. No one knows what you want. No one knows why you're in this world. And you're just in this world thinking like, who am I? Why am I? What am I? And does anyone really understand me? Do I understand anyone else? And we're basically isolated in our own existential internal reality. And how do we break out of that? What's the one way for us to be able to get outside of ourselves and communicate with people who are also in their own internal worlds? Through speech, through genuine speech, where you're able to express yourself out into the world, and other people can, through receiving the vibrations that come out of your mouth, translate that into sound, into words, and into meaning. And somehow inside of their minds exists you. And all of a sudden, from being alone in the world, you're now connected with someone else. And that's genuine speech. And genuine speech is not just words, through facial expressions, through body language, through your actions, everything that you do to express yourself outside of your internal reality, outside of your internal mind, is this concept of speech, which allows us to connect with other people. Now, that's the first aspect of speech. The second spiritual concept of speech, and perhaps the paradigmatic spiritual concept of Dibur, and the Maharal talks about this, the Ramchal talks about this, Vilna Gaon talks about this. The essence of speech is expressing the infinite into the finite. It's taking that which is ethereal, that which is transcendent, that which is infinite, that which is beyond the finite physical expression, and it's somehow marrying the two and expressing the infinite into the finite. So think about what happens when you speak. Think about for a second what happens when you speak. I'm not talking about when you're chit-chatting. I'm talking about when you're trying to formulate a real thought, when you're trying to formulate a real idea. What happens is that you take the ideas that are in your head that aren't really in words. They're really beyond words. And you figure out how to formulate it into concrete thoughts, into concrete words, and you share those with other people. And all of a sudden, that which was, so to speak, beyond words, if you really try to formulate creative thought, you realize that the very first stage, you can't formulate it. At the very first stage, you don't actually know how to formulate it into words. And then through this magical process, you're able to somehow get it into words. And how does that happen? So it's actually, if you look at what is the Hebrew word for word? There's three. One is mila, one is a teva, and one is a davar. So if you think about it, what's a mila? Mila means to cut. What's a teva? A box. And what's a davar? A thing. The essence of speaking is taking that which is abstract, that which is somewhat ethereal and infinite within the abstract aspect of your mind, and expressing it and formulate it into something concrete and finite. So what happens is you take the infinite and you cut it, immediately you cut it, you put it into a teva, a box, and davar, it becomes just that thing. It's like if you really think about words, you say, I love this slice of pizza, and you say, I love you to your spouse. That's just a word. But what's contained within that word is something so infinitely beyond the word. A word is always limited. Speech is always limited. And if you want to take a step back, and then the Vilna Gaon actually formulates this in a beautiful way, the best way to understand the essence of speech is to understand the 5 stages in the process of speech. So what are the 5 stages? So if you think about it, we can do it conceptually, and then I'll show you how it beautifully implements in the concept of speech. So the first stage of speech, the first stage in the concept is like this. The first stage is a flash, right? Think of it almost in the thinking process. You first have this flash of inspiration. And then what happens is you have a general idea, right? That which was this flash of inspiration starts to formulate into this general concept, this general idea. And then it starts to get details. Starts to get more nuanced, more qualified. You say, oh, this is there, this really means that, this is that. And then there's this process of expressing it out into the world. And the 5th stage is the final outer expression. So one of the great mashalim, if you want to think about it before we apply it specifically to speech, is if you want to build a house. Let's say you're an architect, you want to build a house. So you're thinking, what kind of house should I build? So all of a sudden, you're in the shower, you're lying down in your bed, you're walking to shul, and you get this flash of inspiration. Like, I have it. I know what I'm going to build. I know what I'm going to create. And if someone would ask you at that point, so what are you going to build? You'd be like, I can't formulate it into words. I can't explain it to you. But I have it. I know I have it. And then all of a sudden, it starts to gain form. You have a general picture, a general idea of what this house is going to look like. You have like, if you look at from like an outside view, you have like a general idea of the structure, of the shape, the color maybe, of, you know, what the rooms in general, what the format and layout of the house is going to be. But next comes something much more important, which is, okay, but how are you going to actually make that happen? What are the details? Like, what about the nails? What about the door? What about, you know, what's this bathroom? Where are we going to put this? What about this? And all of a sudden, you start to give much more finite detail to the abstract, generalized concept. And then you have to build it. So then you take that brilliant blueprint, that brilliant idea, and you start to actually create the house. That's the fourth stage. What's the fifth stage? The house, the finished product. When you actually can say, that was we say every Friday night in Lechadodi, Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. The final result always originates first in thought. That flash of inspiration turned into that final product, that final house. So the same 5 stages apply to how we speak and how we process our thoughts. If you ever have a brilliant idea, a creative thought, if you're having a really emotional experience and you want to formulate what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what this means, if you're having a spiritual experience, you're connecting to Hashem on a deeper level, you become self-aware in a new way, you have an amazing relationship, you have an amazing connection, amazing experience. The first stage of trying to express that in words is just this flash. There's nothing. There's no words. There's no concrete expression. There's no way to concretize what you're thinking because it's not really thought yet. It's just a flash. And the Hebrew concept there is really, it formulates more in the realm of ratzon, the realm of like higher will, where basically it's just about to drop into your head, but it's not there yet. And then you have the second stage, which is machshava, this general concept, what basically is just a generalized idea. There's no real words yet. It's really this abstract thought, just conceptual abstract thought. And then you get the realm of Bina, where you're breaking it down. It's the realm of intellect, where you can actually process the thought and you start to formulate words. And then there's the process of Dibur, where you actually speak it out to someone else. And the fifth stage is the actual words that you speak, Davar, the word, or Maisa, where you basically take, for example, you want to do a mitzvah, you have to have this whole process of, I want to do that, this is how I'm going to do it, and then you actually carry it out. That final product, the fifth stage, that final expression, is the actual words or the actual actions you do. And we find this in halacha so many times that just the thought alone is not enough. You have to actually bring it out into the physical, concrete world. So, for example, one great example is the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva says that the way that you fulfill the mitzvah of tshuva or the mitzvah of vidui, we're not going to get into the lumdus there in terms of what the Rambam really holds the mitzvah of tshuva is, but the Rambam says that you have to actually speak it. You can't just have charata. You can't say like al-chitz in your mind. You have to speak it. Why? Because you have to take the abstraction and bring it and concretize it into this world. You have to speak it. And many mitzvahs, the same thing for a maisa. You can't just want to do the mitzvah. You have to actually do it with a physical maisa. You can't, say, I really want to do this amazing mitzvah. That's great, but it has to become expressed into this world. And these 5 stages as well, if you want a really beautiful application, these 5 stages are expressed in the Chamishi Chumshei Torah. So the first Sefer Bereishis, is really this flash of inspiration because it's the seed of what's to come. Humanity, really, the world's created, but humanity's created, and it's the seed of what will ultimately become Klal Yisrael, right? You have Adam Rishon, then it gets filtered to Noach, and to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then you have the 12 Shvatim that go into Mitzrayim. Sefer Shemos is that generalized concept. It's the birth of Klal Yisrael in a generalized way, right? Yes, Mitzrayim, Ten Makos, Kriyas Yamsuf, Mount Torah. It's the birth of Klal Yisrael in a general conception. It's the inception and conception of Klal Yisrael. But then what happens? From the generalized concept, we get all the details in Sefer Vayikra. It's a Sefer of the Avoda, of mitzvos, of karbanos, of like, how are we going to actually connect to Hashem? What does it mean to be part of Klal Yisrael? What are we going to do? One second, I think I apologize. I think the audio changed for a second, but can you give me a thumbs up? Can everyone hear me now?
Yes. We can
Okay.
hear you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I apologize.
No, it's all good.
For a second. So then from the generalized concepts of Vayikra, from the details of Vayikra, we get to Bamidbar. Now, Bamidbar is fascinating because it is the essence of what? Of Dibur. Literally in the word Bamidbar means what? Bamidbar means from speech. Because what is Bamidbar? All right. What is Bamidbar? Bamidbar is where we basically start the process of actually living in this world. And whenever you go from the theoretical realm of the idealism of what could be, what should be, when you start to try to actualize that, things always go wrong. That's the essence of living in this world, this finite world, is that we live in the world of trying to become perfect, but not being perfect. And when you try to become perfect, there's imperfection, there's mistakes. So the entire essence of Sefer Bamidbar is actually categorized by problems in the process of bringing everything that happened in Sefer Bereshis and Shemos and Vayikra, bringing that into fruition. What happens? We have the Chet HaMeraglim, Lashon Hara. We have the Chet of Korach, the rebellion of Korach. We have Bilam trying to use Dibur to curse Klal Yisrael. So many examples of Dibur going wrong, Bamidbar. And what's Dvarim? Dvarim is the final expression. It is everything that came before it expressed in finite form. What is it? It's literally Moshe's words. Dibur, Davar, the actual word itself, not the process, the finalized product. And what is Sefer Dvarim? It's a repetition of everything that came before, and it's Moshe's repeating everything that came before, which is absolutely fascinating. There's so much to talk about there, but just for the sake of time, we'll leave it there. But what's the concept here? The concept is that the essence of speech it's the medium of expression. It's the expression from the infinite to the finite. It's the aspect of taking everything which is spiritual, everything which is ethereal, everything which is abstract and infinite and transcendent, and trying to express it into the finite, physical, corporeal, limited realm of our physical world. And when you try to speak, when you really speak, when you're trying to say real thoughts, it's difficult. And that's why communication is difficult, because speech can never convey the thought itself. Whenever you try to say what you're really thinking, what you're really feeling, you always feel that the words didn't really convey what I wanted them to convey. And that's the point. The point is that speech is always a limited expression. And genuine communication is very difficult, because if we take the words literally, we'll never really understand what people are thinking. But if our goal in communication is to say, you're going to give me words and I'm going to use those words as a medium to try to actually get back to what you're thinking, and not to take the words literally and not to project what I would use those words to mean, but to say, what do you mean by those words? And that's the only way to actually communicate, is to almost get beyond the words, but by using the words. And that's what it means that Hashem created the world with speech. It's that what was the act of creation? What is creation? Creation is the expression, the emanation of the infinite to the finite. The physical world is an expression, as the Ramchal explains, and the Maharal explains, the physical world is an expression of the spiritual. What's speech? Taking that which is infinite and expressing it into the finite. What is creation? Taking that which is infinite and expressing it into the finite. The physical world is an expression of the spiritual, and therefore fundamentally creation was an act of speech. The concept, the spiritual concept of speech. And that's also the idea of using the physical world to connect back to Hashem. The physical world is an expression of the spiritual, so you can understand the spiritual through the physical. That's why so many Bali Machshava, basically all of their ideas and thoughts are using all of the things in the physical world as tools and as a medium of a mashal, so we can basically trace ourselves back from the physical world to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and understand the spiritual through the physical. So what's the essence? What's the essence of Moshe's speech impediment? This is a fascinating question, because if you think about it, what was Moshe's speech impediment? So if you look at the Rishonim, there's different opinions, right? The Rashi seems to say it's a speech impediment, but we often think he had a lisp. The Rashbam said, he didn't have a speech impediment. He just forgot Egyptian, so he couldn't speak Egyptian so well. That was his problem with speaking. And the Ran says, no, he had a speech impediment, but the reason he had a speech impediment is because it's so important for the leader of Klal Yisrael, who gave the Torah, not to be one who galvanized the crowd and was an inspiring guru, because then what will people say? People will say the Klal Yisrael only accepted the Torah because they were inspired to. They were, mesmerized, and they were brainwashed by Moshe. It wasn't because of they were committing to Hashem. So what's the Ran and the Drasha around the Ran gives them one of the most famous and really brilliant suggestions, which is that the reason why Moshe had to have a lisp or had to have some form of speech impediment was because for the rest of history, people would never be able to say that Klal Yisrael were convinced to accept the Torah. They will completely recognize that despite Moshe's speech impediment, Klal Yisrael accepted the Torah for one reason and one reason only, because it was 100% true. They accepted it for the right reasons and not because Moshe was an inspirational leader. Does that mean that leaders should not be inspirational? Absolutely not. But in terms of the inception of Klal Yisrael, in terms of Matan Torah, that was something that, at least according to the Ran, it was very important that Klal Yisrael have no external reasons to accept the Torah except the fact that it was emes, except the fact that it was true. But the Maharal gives a brilliant explanation for Moshe's speech impediment. He says, most people think that Moshe had a speech impediment, and it was basically a physical problem that he had. It was basically, Moshe was brilliant, one of the greatest people I've ever, but he had a speech impediment. Maharal says the exact opposite. It's only because Moshe Rabbeinu was so transcendent, so exceptional, such a tzaddik, so perfect, so to speak, or at least as much as a human being could possibly become, that was the essence of his speaking problem. Why? Moshe couldn't speak because he was beyond speech. He lived in such a transcendent, infinite realm, so connected to the spiritual truth of reality, that he couldn't express that into the finite world. He couldn't formulate finite thoughts. He couldn't bring that down into the physical world. Moshe couldn't speak. He needed Aaron to help him bring it down into the world. And what does the Maharal say? He says that there was a transition. Once Hashem gave Moshe the Torah, which itself is a paradox, taking the Ratzon and Chachma of Hashem, which itself is obviously infinite, and somehow expressing that into finite form, into finite words. The fact that we can read the Torah, read words of the Torah, and that is the Ratzon Hashem, that's the Chachma Hashem, that's a paradox. The fact that there is a finite expression of the infinite that we were given, that also gave Moshe the ability to get the koach of Dibor. And right after Moshe receives the Torah, what does Moshe do? He speaks. That's Sefer Dvarim. Moshe suddenly speaks. And that was the first time Moshe was able to speak, as the Maharal explains, without the speech impediment, because he was given the gift of speech, of expressing abstract thought through the finite. And I'll leave you with two very fascinating ideas before we close off. One is that the Gemara Nida says, the Gemara Nida Daf Lamed Amud Beis says that when we were in the womb, we learned Kol HaTorah Kula. And just before we were born, the Malach who was teaching us Kol HaTorah Kula hit us on the mouth and we forgot Kol HaTorah Kula. So the Maharal, and really, every Risha, every Achrid asked the same question. Why are we learning Kol HaTorah Kula if we're going to forget? So this is a famous Gemara, and the Vilna Gaon gives a brilliant explanation. He says the reason why is because we're given it as a gift, but our job is not to get Torah, not to get everything. And he says it's not just Chamishu Chamshe Torah, it's that you are learning the deepest realms of spiritual truth, and you are also learning your purpose in life, your Torah, what you're supposed to come into this world to become. And you forget it, not that it's basically lost, but that you lose access to it so you can come into this world and earn it yourself, because that was a gift. But it's ingrained into your consciousness so that you know subconsciously who you're supposed to become, and then you come into this world and become who you're supposed to become. But the Maharal says, why on the mouth? Why did the Malach hit you on the mouth? Because the mechanism of making you lose access to who you are, making you lose access to transcendent truth, transcendent clarity, transcendent perception, is the gift of speech. It is the very gift of speech that makes us lose connection to Torah, that makes us lose connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, makes us lose connection to truth, makes us lose connection to ourselves. What's the mechanism of re-attaining that transcendent truth? Speech. It's unbelievable, because why? The only way that we can access and re-access truth is through speech, by listening, by talking, by hearing, by receiving through words. But the essence is that speech can't convey the transcendent truth itself. It can lead you to it. If you want to get a real teacher, you want to get a teacher who is going to lead you towards the truth, but they can't give it to you. It's like teaching someone to ride a bike. You can show someone how to ride a bike, but you can't teach them. You can't tell them how to do it. You got to basically show them until they're able to do it themselves. And that's the essence of transcendent truth, is that a teacher can lead you to it, can guide you, can try using words to guide you towards transcendent truths, deeper Torah, the essence of what life is about, but they can't give it to you. And through speech, you have to basically get beyond speech. You have to use speech. And that's the brilliance, that speech is how we lost it, but speech is also how we reattain it. And we use speech by talking about things that we can't talk about. And by talking about things that we can't talk about, you have to somehow allow yourself to be carried. It's almost like the teacher will drop the idea and you have to just allow the idea to find its way into you. Like allow it to drop into your head in the right way. It's like rolling around and you kind of just like, meditate on it until you understand it. And I cannot tell you how many times I would listen to a shiur and have no idea what was being said. And listen to a shiur, have no idea what was being said. And I basically was just convinced that I understood it. And then I was convinced I didn't understand it. And I was convinced I would never understand it. And then 2 years later, I heard one thing and it completely transformed retroactively what I had heard 2 years ago. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I understood it. And then a year later, what I thought I understood then, completely revolutionary. It's this endless process of realizing that speech will always lead you towards something more, but you have to go on that vulnerable journey to something even deeper. And that's the essence of speech. And what's the corruption? What's the evil of Lashon Hara? Because what's the purpose of speech? Everything in this world is about connection. Right? We want to connect to our higher selves, who we're supposed to become. We want to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We want to connect to other people, to Klal Yisrael. We want to connect to ideas. We want to connect to our family. We want to connect to basically everything. We want to basically build and connect and bridge the gaps between everything and build oneness, build interconnectivity, build chachma, build brilliance. The essence of speech on an interpersonal level is connecting us together. We use speech to build relationship, to communicate, to connect, to enjoy each other's company, to share ideas, to build something powerful. What does Lashon Hara do? He uses that same koach, that same power of speech that connects people together, and he uses it to disconnect people. It's the ultimate corruption of speech. That's why, by the way, if you want to really think about it, why isn't sheker called Lashon Hara? You'd think that sheker would be worse, right? Sheker should be worse than Lashon Hara. So Lashon Hara literally means bad speech. We understand it means when you use speech to, hurt people. But sheker is also Lashon Hara. It's bad speech. It's using speech to tell lies. But sheker is not Lashon. Sheker is not speech. Because what is speech? Speech is the physical expression of something that is infinite. It's basically expressing the ethereal infinite, the spiritual, into the physical. It's when the outer expression is truth. Sheker, you're telling somebody something, they think it's true, but it's not true. It doesn't actually exist in reality. They think you're communicating something that's real, but it's not real. It's a lie. Lashon Hara is you take Lashon, you take something which is actually true. It's true Lashon, but you corrupt it. You turn it into Lashon Hara. You turn it into evil truth, evil speech, and you use the koach of speech itself to disconnect people from each other. So the Meraglim use speech to disconnect Klal Yisrael from Eretz Yisrael and to disconnect Klal Yisrael from Hashem. Lashon Hara, the essence of Lashon Hara is using the power of speech to disconnect people. So what's the midah keneged midah of someone who speaks Lashon Hara? They get isolated from the community. Why? Because they use speech to disconnect people from each other. So they get disconnected from the tzibur, from the kehillah, from Klal Yisrael, so that they can learn this idea of what they're doing with their Lashon. They're using Lashon to disconnect people. They now get removed, disconnected from the community in the hopes they'll do teshuvah and be able to reconnect to Klal Yisrael and use Lashon properly. But it's the brilliant essence of what Lashon is. It's the power to connect. It's the responsibility to use speech properly. And to sum up, our real mission in life is to connect to the truth and express it into this world, to become our ultimate selves, to use speech properly. Shmiras HaLashon is not just watching against speaking inappropriately, it's learning how to speak powerfully and properly. Someone who knows how to speak is unstoppable. Someone who knows how to speak, they can do anything. They can uplift anyone. They can use the koach of speech to do the most incredible things on a personal level, with friendships, on a professional level, with clients, on a tzibur level, uplifting a community. Speech can do wonders. But our job is not to be used by the koach of speech, but to use it. And there are really three higher forms of speech, and we'll close with this. The three higher forms of speech are: one, to use speech to express the infinite, the spiritual, to express higher thoughts into this world, to learn Torah, to become Torah, to live Torah, and then to speak Torah, to become a walking, speaking Torah, to embody and express Torah into this world. And everything about you, how you eat, how you look, how you walk, how you talk, you're speaking all the time. Everything you do is a spoken word. It just might not be a verbal spoken word, but everything that we do in our entire life is a giant, we are walking, really we're just walking speakerphones. And that's what it means to be a walking Kiddush Hashem. It's that what you express, what you embody, what you represent is Kol Torah. It's something extraordinary, something inspiring. And the second form of speech is to use speech to connect. It is so easy. And I've given shirim on this because I feel like it is very important. The real koach and the real desire behind Lashon Hara is that it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to speak about other people behind their backs. It's enjoyable to put other people down, partially because it makes us feel better about ourselves, and partially it's just a great way to pass time. Talking about other people is interesting, but we know it's not, first of all, no one, if you hear someone speaking Lashon Hara to you, you know that when you leave the room, they're probably going to be speaking Lashon Hara about you as well. So we all know that Lashon Hara just doesn't work. And we think that, I'll speak Lashon Hara and people will like me because I'll be the most interesting person in the crowd. I'll basically entertain everybody. But when we go home at night, the people who we really love and the people who we really admire, appreciate, respect, and want to build relationships with are the people who don't speak about other people. And the famous quote, some people speak about things, some people speak about events, but great people speak about ideas. It's just something to aspire to. And that's the best way to connect with people, is to use speech to connect with people in a higher way. And the third form of speech, which I think is the ideal and highest form of speech, is to see the world itself, the world you live in, as Hashem's continuous speech. The Nefesh HaChaim explains that, contrary to popular belief, Hashem didn't create the world once. Hashem constantly creates the world, which means that Hashem didn't create the world once, now the world's just going by itself. Hashem is constantly willing the world into existence, which, by the way, it means that Hashem is constantly creating everyone and everything and constantly creating you, which means that Hashem is literally thinking you into existence. It's like, if you want to think about this, I'll give you an amazing thought experiment. Think about someone in your head. Give the person a name, clothing, give them a personality, give them a background. They're in your head. Now stop thinking about them. They cease to exist. The only way they can exist within you is if you continuously think about them and will them into existence. That's how Nefesh HaChaim explains how Hashem constantly wills and creates everything, including all of us, which means that Hashem is constantly thinking about us and willing us into existence, which means that the world is constantly being brought into existence, which means that Hashem is constantly creating the world. How does Hashem create the world? Through speech. That means not only the physical world is an expression of the spiritual, but that everything that happens to you is Hashem speaking to you, which means that the entire world is a constant conversation. And that's what Rashi explains, is not this one-time event of Ma'an Torah, where Hashem spoke to us one time, but it's for all of history. Hashem is constantly speaking to us. And Sfas Emes explains, why did Avram only hear Lech Lecha? Why didn't Hashem say Lech Lecha to everyone? Sfas Emes says he did, just Avram was listening. It's like a radio channel. It's always going. You have to tap into the right frequency. Hashem is constantly speaking to us. And the Ramban says that our job is to make Ma'an Torah not a one-time event, but the Ramban actually says that you're not supposed to remember Ma'an Torah. You're supposed to never forget. Remembering happens when you forget it, you bring it back into your consciousness. Never forgetting, meaning it's always there. You never forget that you're alive. You never say, like, I forgot I'm alive. You're always aware and conscious of that. Well, Ma'an Torah is the same thing. We have to constantly be conscious that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly connecting to us, and we have to constantly connect back. And Hashem is constantly speaking to us, and we have to constantly speak back. And life is a conversation with ourselves, with our friends, with our spouses, with our children, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And really, ultimately, it starts with having a conversation with yourself. When you say that it starts with me, it starts with how I'm going to choose to live my life, what I'm going to choose to think about, what I'm going to choose to speak about. That Shmir Salashon doesn't just mean that I'm going to, watch myself and guard myself from speaking badly, but I'm going to start speaking positively. I'm going to start speaking, empowering thoughts to myself, empowering thoughts to other people. And that's really what it means to be walking Kiddush Hashem, where everything you say and everything you do represents something infinitely higher than yourself. So my bracha to all of us is that we should be inspired to use speech to express higher thoughts, to think about higher thoughts, to think about Torah, to live Torah, to become Torah, to use speech to connect with other people, and to see the entire world as a HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to us, and a HaKadosh Baruch Hu expressing something infinitely higher into this world.
Rabbi Shmuel, I can say as well, and you're unstoppable, and what a treat to have you join